Hi, this is Taylor Morden, director of The Last Blockbuster, and you're listening to Spoiler Country.
In a world of podcasts, one rises in the night to destroy them all. The elder god in an ocean of noise, the Cthulhu of the airwaves. This is Spoiler Country.
Hello, listeners of Spoiler Country. Today on the show, we have the fantastic filmmaker, Mr. Taylor Morden. How's it going, sir?
Good. How are you doing?
It's a great pleasure to talk with you. I'm a big fan of your latest film, The Last Blockbuster. It's awesome.
Thank you very much.
So, when did you fall in love with film?
Oh man, I've loved movies since I was a little kid. Mostly I would see them on TV, edited for TV. Sunday evening movies and whatnot, and would rent movies here and then. But I can't remember not loving movies.
There's something amazing about film, isn't there? Something that just sticks with you and kind of gets inside you for always.
Yeah, it's a special connection with stories, right? Like I love TV too, but movies are their own thing, and they usually have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And I don't know, there's something really magical about a great movie and the way it sticks with you. And then the way like watching a movie you love can make you feel, can bring you back to those same feelings that you had the first time you watched it. Like I love watching movies from the 80s and 90s when I was a kid, and they take you back in a unique way, the same way, music does and other things, but it's pretty cool.
I agree with you. I mean, I'm still probably somewhat damaged from Neverending Story. And then that horror scene, it sticks with you to the point where you're still like, damn, there's some part of my brain that's probably still damaged from that moment.
100%. And then you forget about it until you watch that movie again and you're like, oh no, reliving this trauma.
I know it feels like that sometimes. You're like, some people have real trauma, but for mine it was on film.
Yeah. For me, it was I think my mom took me to see Little Shop of Horrors in the theater when I was too young, way too young. I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 years old. And it was terrifying. I was so scared of, this man-eating plant for years and years. I was just like terrified of, and then it's a comedy movie, and dentists too. There's a terrifying dentist scene, Steve Martin, in that movie that, sticks with me to this day. And it's just because I was too young the first time I saw it.
Yeah, I think the movie that still gets me in my memory, I mean, I've seen it since, and it doesn't hit me quite the same way anymore. There's a movie back in the 80s called The Lady in White. Do you remember that movie at all?
I don't.
It's about I believe it was a girl had been murdered, and she's wearing white, and a kid goes in to investigate, and obviously gets himself into trouble trying to solve the murder of this individual. And it wasn't, looking back at, like, as an adult, it wasn't all that scary, but as a kid, I just remember it scared the shit out of me. I was like, oh my God, people try killing kids? What kind of craziness is that?
Yeah.
They're supposed to be doing that stuff. So when you decided to become a filmmaker, was it always a documentary that you were interested in producing, or what led you to that path?
Well, I got into filmmaking through music. I played in bands for most of my life, and started with music videos, and then commercials and lots of things like that. And that really sort of led me down this path through commercials and like corporate work, where I was making documentaries. We were calling it something else, but like company profiles and things like that. But it was telling real life stories, and that's what I was doing for a living. And I filmed a lot of weddings too, which is also a documentary about somebody's wedding day, right?
Yeah.
So it's kind of just the skill set that I learned. And I loved scripted things. Like in music videos, we would try to tell a story, and I've done short films and written a few scripts, and would love to make a narrative scripted movie. But the thing about a documentary is you can just do it. With a script, you need actors, you need a budget, you need locations, you need all these things. With a documentary, you just need a camera, really, and time. You can spend your own time doing it. So that's kind of why I did my first documentary, is because I could, I didn't need to ask anybody's permission. It wasn't going to cost me tons of money out of pocket. I could just go do it. And then that really got me hooked on filmmaking, because that movie, came out, played in some theaters, did some film festivals, and I kind of got hooked on that experience. And the best way that I could see to keep doing that was to keep making documentaries. So I've kind of been doing that ever since, but I'm still, I have a great love for narrative films as well, and would love to make them. I've worked on a few, but I haven't directed any.
Now, how do you determine what subject matter you want to make a film about? I mean, is a particular something that just captures your attention? Like, this is a film, or is it just through discussions? How does that happen?
Yeah, it's usually, so I'll keep a spreadsheet of ideas for narrative films and documentaries. And every time I have an idea of what would make a good documentary, I put it in that spreadsheet. And I've noticed that I don't really go back to it and look for ideas. It's whatever sticks, whatever I'm still thinking about 3 weeks later without going to the spreadsheet. That's usually what I'll do, because you have to live with these things in some cases for 3 or 4 years as your main focus. So it's important to me that it's something that I'm going to have fun with or be interested in for that whole time. And I'm also like kind of my own audience gauge, kind of like if I think something's interested, then I know other people might also think it's interesting, because I don't know, I like regular stuff. I like mainstream things, right? I like superhero movies and Star Wars and Back to the Future, and I like all those things, and I like Blockbuster Video. So maybe other people like Blockbuster Video. I'm not into like weird niche thing. I mean, I am, but not as like I wouldn't make a movie about something that I don't think anybody cares about, because who's going to watch that movie?
Yeah, no, I that makes total sense. And how did Pop Motion Pictures?
It was just me when I was doing music videos, commercials, things like that. I needed a company, and so I made a company.
It's what people do.
And registered an LLC, and now I have a company, but it's mostly just me. I mean, I hire people now and then to work on things, but everybody's got their own production company nowadays.
And I read things about Pop Motion, though. I really like the slogan that you have, which is, "We don't make movies, we make time machines." What does that slogan mean to you?
I think I heard somebody say something similar, and it stuck with me. I'm a big time travel fan, and I think in real life we don't have time travel, but we have nostalgia. And kind of my main thing, like if it was something to base Pop Motion Pictures brand around, it's nostalgia. I've done 3 feature movies that are all kind of in the 90s, in the 80s. And I think, a good nostalgic movie or show, like a Stranger Things or any of these things that kind of tie into the feeling of nostalgia, what it does is it takes you back to that place and time, which is what a time machine does.
Yeah.
So it's the closest thing we have. I mean, music does it too, and TV and everything, but I don't know. I think a documentary about a thing you grew up with, it takes you back to that thing. And it's pretty exciting to try to make that, to try to capture what it is about these memories that matter, what has the staying power, and what's maybe what wasn't so good. And I think it's all kind of interesting. And movies can be time machines, whether they have time machines in them or not.
And I think nostalgia is so important. I think it's great to once in a while just go back to when you're younger. I mean, I think everyone just needs that release to go back when things just felt simpler. I mean, people can always, obviously in the past, every time had this complications, but I think every individual felt things were simpler when they were younger. And those movies that bring them to that point, or moments, I think are so important.
Yeah. I mean, your life, when you're young, you don't have bills to pay. You don't have, taxes. You don't have,
Yeah.
you don't have to deal with car insurance and going and getting a driver's license and any of the things that make grown-up life annoying and stupid. It's all not there. And that's why, we all have this fondness for that time. But also people, I don't know how old you are, but I just turned 40. So
yeah, I'm 41.
Exactly. So we're the exact same age. So we grew up without the internet, without cell phones, without any of that stuff. And we were the last generation to do that.
Yep.
Right. The kids, I've got like younger brother and sister-in-law. They're just 10 years younger, but they had the internet from the time they were able to talk, really.
Yeah.
And they had cell phones from the time their parents decided they were old enough. I didn't get one until college because they weren't practical or affordable, and nobody had one anyways. It didn't matter. I had my landline. But I think our particular little micro generation has an extra level of nostalgia, or like that feeling you were talking about of wanting to be back at a simpler time, because real life was simpler before you could Google things, before everyone was accessible all the time. Like if I was not at home, no one could call me.
Right.
No one could text me. No one could email me, or you could, but I would check it once a week, maybe.
Right.
Because I had to dial into a thing and log off of a whatever.
Yep.
So it really was a simpler time, and it was the last of those simpler times. Now we just live in iterations of this technological world. Like I just saw the trailer for the new Matrix movie, which, clearly they're leaning into that aspect, because the first one was made in 99, which was the beginning of this technological age where the Matrix was like this cautionary tale. And now we're living in it, and everybody's glued to their devices, and everybody's, lives on the internet, on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Twitter. We all live there. And then the real world is this separate thing, especially during the last couple of years with COVID. Like so much of our lives is on the internet, which is what the first Matrix movie was warning us about. So I think, it's all tied to nostalgia, but our particular nostalgia is unique in that way of like, we were also like the last kids who just played outside, and your parents said, come home when it's dark, or, or they didn't, and nobody cared.
Right.
And, you could kind of be more on your own because the world was just simpler, safer. And it wasn't safer, but it felt safer because we didn't know what we know now.
Right. And I think too, when you're a kid, I think your passions are just felt greater. You know what I'm saying? I mean, I think as you get older, even though you have interests, I think they're always more muted than when you're a kid, where it's just far more unabashed, Right.
But also when we were kids, you didn't have as much stuff, right? So like I liked comic books, but I got my comic books at 7-Eleven. There wasn't a comic book store near me. So I could only get X-Men, Spider-Man, Batman, Superman, Archie.
Yeah.
That's it. I couldn't be into weird, obscure comic books because I couldn't get them. And there was no internet to tell me about a person with a dog tail who was also attacked. Hello.
Sorry, my computer just shut itself off. Sorry about that. That's embarrassing, but sorry.
Are we back? Are we good?
It looks like the computer just came back on. I guess thank you, technology, for saving its spot. And seems like there's no worries. But we're just talking about the problems of technology. My computer's like, remember this.
Right.
Sorry about that, sir.
The point I was trying to make was that there were fewer things, and we had more of a shared experience before the internet, before you could be into whatever you wanted, and you kind of had to fixate on, whatever the mainstream things were. MTV told you what music there was. You couldn't go down a Spotify rabbit hole, so it's interesting now, like, I wonder what people will be nostalgic about from the year 2017 or 2020 even, because everybody was into their own thing. We didn't have a shared, like when the first Ninja Turtles movie came out, every kid saw that movie and every kid loved that movie. And it's not, now there's like 500 children's shows. And if you had Netflix in your house, you saw those. And if you had Hulu in your house, you saw those. Not everybody, not since like whatever's going on right now with Blue's Clues, didn't have these shared things, right? Maybe Pokemon, when Pokemon Go was in full swing, what was that? But it's so segmented now that everybody can be into their own thing. So I don't know that we'll have, this might be the death of nostalgia, because everybody will have their own memories and their own things that they grew up with, but not that shared thing of like, man, in 1983, every kid had those same Star Wars action figures, or boys did, and girls had those same Barbies, because we were very, toys had to be gendered then, and you had to everybody had their own thing. But now it's like kids don't even play with toys. And so when you lose that physical connection to something, you certainly have a different sense of nostalgia. Like for what, an app? A YouTube clip that you watched when you were a kid? I don't
Face
know.
mask, maybe.
Well, yeah, this generation is going to have their own. It's like trauma. Of growing up in this time.
And there's things like the movie what came out was Ready Player One that came out, which is very much nostalgia heavy. And sometimes it feels like some people give nostalgia a bad rap, but nostalgia, I think, is so essential to individuals. I think it's necessary. And I think things like Ready Player One and things like that, who does play on nostalgia, I think do a service. I think it's nice to revisit that regularly. I think we need it more often.
Yeah, exactly.
So your newest film is The Last Blockbuster, which was, like I said, was a fantastic film. I really enjoyed it. Can you give our listeners your pitch for it?
Pitch? I haven't had to pitch it in a while, but there's, at one point there were 9,000 Blockbuster videos in the world, and now there's just one. And we wanted to tell the story of that store and how we got there.
So when you're envisioning making The Last Blockbuster, was it the franchise that interested you the most, or the people manning the last store that was what actually drew you emotionally to creating this film?
The first thing that hooked me, I was living in Bend, Oregon, where the store is, and driving by it, I had assumed it was closed because I had lived in other towns that had closed, abandoned Blockbusters. They're all over the country. They're all over the world. And you can still drive up to them and, drop litter in their Dropbox if they still have it. And people do that all the time. People send me Instagram photos of abandoned Blockbusters pretty much every day. But when I went in, when I realized it was a fully functioning Blockbuster video, and this was in 2017, it really struck me as fascinating. I had so many questions, like, how are they still open? Who is still renting movies here? What is going on? But the smell hit me really hard. That's kind of why we cover it in the movie. And just the feeling of walking up and down the aisles and browsing movies really took me back. And it had only been at that point maybe 3 or 4 years since Blockbuster was open, and I was an avid customer, so it's not like I had been missing it for decades or whatever. But it took me back, maybe 15 years to the peak of when I would go there all the time. And I knew that there was a story there, mostly based on this one store. But the questions are really what hooked me. Like, who is keeping this place open? Why?
Right.
Who's shopping here? What's going on? And that was enough for me to ask them if we could start bringing cameras there and start filming. I didn't know if there was going to be a movie or just, a little 10-minute short or what, but I had just finished my first movie. And so I thought I was a filmmaker. And so I asked them if I could bring cameras there and just see what happens. And that was 4 years to the month before our movie came out.
So how much time of that did you spend actually filming this and putting it together, of the actual filming?
Yeah, well, we were off and on. That first day was in March of 2017, and I think we shot the last bit in like December of 2019.
Oh, wow.
And then we used a bit in the post credits of like a Jimmy Kimmel clip from 2020, because we knew people would ask what happened during COVID and did they close. So we wanted to throw in that little clip that said, no, they're somehow still open. So really, that people ask how long, like how many days did we shoot it or something. I have no idea, because we were kind of always ready to go film, because Zeke, who made it with me, and I both lived in Bend. We were working on other projects here and there, so we just kept our cameras ready. And Sandy, who managed the store, would call us and be like, hey, the New York Times is coming next week, can you be here? Or we're gonna get that Russell Crowe memorabilia, can you come on down?
That's cool.
And so it was off and on for 4 years, but I don't know how many days we shot. And some days we would go down there and nothing would happen, and we would just hang out and look at movies.
I mean, that's incredible. 2 years, that's a huge investment of time. And one thing I love about this kind of filmmaking is that it seems like it's such an unpredictable thing, because you're telling a story in real time. You don't know how it's going to end. It's not like a scripted film where this is the beginning of my film, this is the end, this is an arc that I know I'm happy with. You don't know the arc of reality of what's going to happen. So how do you prepare for that level of unpredictability? I mean, did you have different narratives depending on how things played out? Did you visualize the different possibilities, like this, how this could end?
Yeah, we started with an outline of what we kind of hoped might happen, right? When we started, they weren't even in the last 10 blockbusters. There were 12 or 13 left. And so we didn't know that they were going to be the last one. We didn't know that, it would be a media sensation and people would start coming from all over the world. We didn't know any of that. That all just happened while we were making the movies. So you got to roll with it. We knew the historical part and the nostalgia part, those weren't going to change. So we could work on telling the corporate story of Blockbuster Video, how they came to be and why they went out of business, because that's an interesting part. And then we knew sort of like our celebrity interviews and people remembering renting videos, that's going to be relevant no matter what happens. But we didn't know they were going to be the last store. And we didn't know at that point, we spent a year kind of not knowing whether they were going to be able to stay open. That was a thing. And so you keep changing your outline, and we had for a while sort of two endings. Like if they close, this is how the movie ends. And if they stay open, that's the happy ending. And we were just still working, and we were editing, and we had a movie that didn't have an ending for a while. It was like 6 months waiting to hear back from Dish whether they were going to stay open or not. And then, spoiler alert, they stay open. People know that they're open, but it's all out of your control. So it's a different kind of filmmaking where you're waiting to find out what happens and you have no control over it. So what we did is, while we were waiting, we would focus on these other parts, and we would go, shoot that Kevin Smith interview, or, hang out with Jamie Kennedy, because those things were kind of independent from waiting to see what happened with the store.
So, I mean, I know the name of the film obviously is The Last Blockbuster. What was the film going to be if this wasn't The Last Blockbuster when you started? Was there a different film that you had in mind?
It's funny. That was always the name.
Okay.
Once it had a name, but it was like a hopeful. I think I called it that when there were still like 6 or 7 stores left. And I'm like, I don't know, it's the last one in Oregon. So it's a Last Blockbuster. It's not the Last Blockbuster. And then for a while, they were the last one in the United States, but there was still a store in Australia. And we didn't really get into that in the movie because we didn't know. That was kind of sprung on us. And then by the time we found out about it, they were also closing.
Yeah.
So they were the last one in America, and that was a big news story and everybody cared. And then almost a year later, like the store in Australia popped up and then closed. So they were the last one in the world.
Yeah.
And that was a big news story. And we kind of in the movie just sort of lumped that all into one, them becoming the last store. But, you know, in real life, we were waiting, like we were calling Dish and being like, are there any more? Is there like a store in Italy we don't know about that is going to pop up and claim the throne? And we were assured that this is the last officially licensed Blockbuster video in the world. And I've heard rumors of some like bootleg Blockbuster videos, but those aren't real. Like anybody can put up a sign, and it's not like they're a big corporation that'll come after you anymore. It's, you know,
right. So
licensing division at Dish.
So the title kind of jinxed all the others. The Last Blockbuster, so everything else kind of closed.
Yeah, we had the title and we were like, well, I hope it is. Wouldn't it be cool? I remember at the very beginning, Zeke and I sat down and we're like, wouldn't it be cool if this was the last one? Like, yeah, that would be very cool for our little story. And it was.
It worked out for you. So, I mean, once again, Blockbuster obviously is the name of the film. The Last Blockbuster is about Blockbuster. But in watching the film, I kind of feel like the star of the film really is Sandy Harding. Would you agree with me on that? She's kind of like the star of the film. So,
well, we initially, Sandy's the main character, but Blockbuster Video is the star of the film. Like we were pitching out to like celebrities to be in the movie, you know, Steven Spielberg, Tom Hanks, big names. Yeah. And we're like, it doesn't matter who they are, how famous they are. They're never going to be, you know, on the cover of the DVD because it's Blockbuster Video is the star. No one is more famous than that. So yes, Sandy Harding is definitely the main character and really the star of the movie, but it was nice working on something where Blockbuster Video was such a iconic thing that it was like, oh, we have an A-list celebrity as the star of our movie. It just happened to be a defunct video chain.
So how did you use Sandy, uses main name, but how did you utilize Sandy Harding to humanize the franchise of the Blockbuster and give kind of like an anchor to the film?
Well, we got very lucky in that the person you see in the movie is who she really is. And she is just this wonderful, loving, caring, you know, kind, great person that we loved being around. And it naturally, from a storytelling perspective, it was like, oh, this is who you would want to manage the Last Blockbuster. You know, if you could pick anybody, you don't want it to be like a grumpy old guy who was in it for the money. You want it to be like this mom who loves, you know, helping the kids who work there get through their day to day, and who loves movies, and who kind of gets a kick out of it being the last store and is really having a good time with it. And so we were very lucky that it was this store, because, you know, the other stores had different managers, and we like to think that that's why, you know, Sandy is the reason why this store outlasted everybody else. But, you know, any other store could have been the last one, and then we would have been stuck interviewing their manager. And I've talked to a lot of people over the past few years who worked at Blockbuster, and most of them did not love their general managers that they worked under. These were not the best people in the world.
I mean, I think you did such a good job of capturing that last store and the feeling of that store, and obviously Ms. Harding as the manager. I mean, there's a moment that I think it's just something so brilliant and kind of quaint about her going to, I think like it was like the local Best Buy to buy the movies to rent at her store. I was like, how does that even happen? Like you would think because it's a Blockbuster at all, it's obviously going to be ordered from corporations. It's going to get mailed to them, but she's going and just buying them. I was like, that's so crazy.
Yeah, that was one of the things when I first met Sandy. I bombarded her with all the questions I had even before we had cameras rolling. And that was one of the things that shocked me the most, because when we first met her, it was when they just stopped distributing DVDs. Like before 2017, they would still get all their movies the way they always did. But then distributors stopped doing it. They would shut down. There aren't enough video stores to make it make sense. And I think for a few years, they still got them from one of the movie companies. So she would only have to go buy some movies because some would still get delivered to the store the way they always were. And then over the years, when we were following her story, like they all stopped doing it and she just had to go buy all the movies. But that is one of those human things, just like how she repairs the computers herself. It's just like, wow, this was this giant corporation and now it's this small business run by this woman. And if she doesn't go buy the movies, they have no movies. Like,
yeah,
that's such a cool thing to me. Like, of course that had to be part of the story because, wow, how crazy is that?
It did. I like when you saw that when you were filming that, or at least I saw it in the film. I thought to myself, it didn't for a second just didn't click. I was like, wait, what is happening now? She's literally shopping for her Blockbuster. I was like, that can't be real, but obviously it was. And I once again, I couldn't help think it would really take this one individual to actually go out about doing something like that. I mean, I don't see that as being a standard managerial video store thing.
No, and you think about when she started in 2004, it was when Blockbuster was the biggest. When we say they had 9,000 stores, that was the year they had 9,000 stores. And so she was starting work at this Blockbuster Video when they were the biggest corporation they would ever be. And it was like a very corporate job. They had all these people to answer to and everything was provided for them. They were a franchise of a giant company. And then, once that company went away, they were really just kind of on their own. There was nobody, they had a tech support person. I think he's based in Texas and he was the tech support for all the remaining Blockbusters. And there were still hundreds, but it was just this one person who would go help them with their computers and whatnot. And it just sort of evolved down to, then he retired and she still has his phone number, but she became the person responsible for fixing the computers. And there were never going to be new computers or software updates or anything. It was just like time stopped when Blockbuster went out of business and they were left on their own to like figure it out. And I think Bend, Oregon is very lucky to have a Sandy Harding who could figure it out, because a lot of people would have just walked away and said, no, this is not the job I signed up for.
Right. When you interview Ms. Harding, could you get a sense if her dedication to her store changed from when it was, they say 2004 was a massive chain to when it's just one? Can you get it, or did she discuss, like, was there a sense of further ownership of her store now that it really became kind of her store?
I think that happened very naturally. She was, she's been a manager there for forever, and it always has been kind of her store. It's just that, the corporate side of it went away, but you saw it really happen when they became the last one and she started being interviewed on the news and for our movie and things like that. And people started paying attention to her. It was almost like this recognition that she had earned over almost 20 years. And it seemed like people were just realizing, because we talked to her employees and they knew the whole time. They're like, oh, Sandy is the heart and soul of this place. And we wouldn't have a video store if it wasn't for Sandy, and blah, 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 how great she was. So it was almost like, I don't know, poetic somehow, that finally everybody could see what this woman had been doing this whole time. But I think to her, it was always her store. The owners kind of left it to her to manage for a long time. And when she talks about the early years, it seems very much like very similar, just less, she didn't have to go out and buy the DVDs and she didn't have to open up the computers and do those things. But she took a lot of pride in managing that store. And I think that shows.
So the survival of the Last Blockbuster, like, do you contribute it more to, once again, Sandy, the quality of, or do you think there's something about Bend itself that can allow something like this to still exist? I know you kind of touch on it in the film as well, and I really like that part. But I'm really kind of curious where you land on why this city, why Bend, or town?
Yeah, I think it's kind of a perfect storm of all those things. I don't think it would have worked without Sandy, and I don't think it would have worked in a bigger town. I don't think it would have worked in a smaller town. Bend is very, I don't know, it's got a vibe to it where the people who are from there are proud of it. They're, a lot of hometown pride, and it's also been a tourist town forever and kind of a ski town and a destination where people come, and I don't know, they rent a hotel or an Airbnb or something, and in that Airbnb there's a DVD player, and hey, there's a Blockbuster down the road. So I don't know, I heard a rumor when we were researching for the movie, and it might very well be true, but I couldn't confirm it, so we couldn't put it in the movie. But they said at one time, I think in the 90s, Bend, Oregon had more VCRs per capita than any other place in the United States.
That's an odd stat.
It's a weird stat, but then, and I talked to Ken, the owner, and at one point, I think right before they were a Blockbuster, when they were a Pacific Video, they had 4 stores in that town, and that town at that time probably only had 20,000 people in it. So imagine, 4 video stores in a really, really tiny town, and they're all profitable. Like they're all somehow sustaining. So that tells me that for whatever reason, and Bend is a very outdoorsy town, so it's not because there aren't other things to do, but for some reason, just people love movies and they love renting movies there. So that has to have contributed somehow.
Because looking at things from a 2021 mindset, it takes a special kind of person in the world at time of streaming to decide, I'm going to get in my car, drive down to the store, walk around these other people, go to the register and interact, come back home and watch this movie, and then have the energy to go drive back to the store and drop it off. I mean, there's a certain kind of mindset there that in the streaming world doesn't seem to exist anymore anywhere else.
Yeah, I have noticed that too, where sometimes like you can buy pretty much anything on Amazon or on the internet, and sometimes you still want to go to a store, right, and touch the thing and try out the thing. It makes perfect sense. Like for clothes, people are always going to want to go try on clothes, and and I don't know, there's something for me, it kind of always made sense because I like physical media, and DVDs and like special features were always big for me, and streaming doesn't really have that, or they do, but you got to go down a YouTube rabbit hole to find things. So it's always been like, if there is a way I can watch something on DVD or Blu-ray, I'm going to do that. But you're right, it's so much more difficult to drive to a place and pick out a movie and then rent the movie and then take it home and put it in a machine, watch it, and then drive it back to that place
on time.
It's almost inconceivable how difficult it was for all of us to watch movies. Even, it's not that long ago. It was like 12 years ago when that was the norm. Streaming wasn't reliable. And then there was that brief window where DVDs came in the mail, where like it was kind of in between, and Blockbuster did that too. And you could rent movies from their website and then exchange them at the store. I did that for a while. Netflix would mail you a DVD, but Blockbuster would mail you a DVD that you could then take to a Blockbuster instead of having to mail it back. So you can get your next movie faster and do all that, which was great. But, they could compete on that front with the mail away discs because they had the library and all the movies. But as soon as streaming hit and they didn't adopt that, it just, you can't compete with just sitting on your couch and pushing a button.
I agree. I mean, what became popular around here, I'm sure everywhere, is like the Redbox, where it's just this little booth that you can do it. And I remember going to, like, it's around Walmart. They had some other places, and still, I mean, I might see it on the Redbox, like, oh, that looks cool. And I think to myself, am I really going to wake up tomorrow and drop off this freaking movie? No, I'm not renting, because I'm not going to drive back and drop this thing off on time.
I've never used a Redbox, and I never understood the appeal, and I still don't understand the appeal. They're everywhere, and people still rent DVDs from them, but like, I guess it's cheaper. I don't quite understand, because any movie that's in a Redbox, you can pretty much rent on your on demand on the thing, and it's $3 or whatever. So I don't understand the Redbox appeal, except from the standpoint of convenience of, like, yeah, it's at 7-Eleven, and I go to 7-Eleven every day, so of course I'll remember to bring it back. Or it's at Walmart, or it's at Safeway, or wherever you go. And that was the windfall for Redbox, because Blockbuster also tried to do those, but the real estate was all taken by Redbox already. So Blockbuster would put those kiosks outside of a Blockbuster Video, which doesn't make any sense, because if you're there already, just go in the store.
Right.
Nobody needs to use a vending machine in a Blockbuster parking lot. That's just bad marketing.
Yeah, and I mean, the other thing that's kind of interesting is, do you think there's a negative impact on society that we're losing by not having something like, or even the industry, by having something like a Blockbuster where you go in and, like, interact with people? There's someone there who can give you advice, as you mentioned in your film, and be like, hey, this is a good movie, check it out. Do you think there's something bad for the industry as to lose that aspect of having someone who will say, hey, this is one to watch, don't watch this, and just have that kind of interaction about the movie? Talk to someone that you can talk to. Hey, I saw this movie, what did you think? And we don't do that at home anymore, because you don't need to talk to anybody about it. You're watching it, you're never going to interact with anyone about it. Do you think there's an impact on the industry from not having video stores anymore?
Oh, 100%. And I miss it dearly, but we do have social media. Everybody on my Facebook feed is talking about whatever new movie they just saw, and it's fun. In the 90s, I would go on, like, a Jurassic Park message board, and we would talk about Jurassic Park, because I lived in a small town, and I, didn't have places to go and hang out with people. I would have to drive an hour to go hang out at the mall or whatever. So when the internet first came out, that was interesting to me. And that was one of the first things I did, was go on the internet to talk about movies with people. And that's still a thing. I think it's kind of toxic.
Yeah, that's about to point out, is like, you can still talk, but you don't have the guy behind the desk saying, you fucking loser, how can you like this movie? It's like, oops. It's not like the social media anymore.
There is something, I think we touch on this in the movie too, of, like, you walk into a video store and you grab a couple of movies, and the person behind the desk has a pretty good idea of what kind of movies you like, because of maybe the way you're dressed, or the movies you picked out, or they overheard you talking to your friends about something. So that kind of happenstance of, like, or another big thing was, you would go to a video store and the movie you wanted would be gone. So you would have to pick a different movie, and you'd have to talk to a person and be like, you know what? I came down here, I wanted to rent The Matrix, and it's out. What else? What's good? And they would be like, oh man, there was this movie in the 80s. It's kind of like that. And you'd end up going home with whatever, Schwarzenegger's Running Man or Total Recall or something. And it was cool.
Yeah.
Because that's how you found out about movies. And now there's just robots that pick out movies for you, and they're not that smart.
Now, another thing about The Last Blockbuster is, obviously throughout time, I mean, there's other franchises that have been big and imploded. There's several of them. What is it about, you think, Blockbuster that has maintained that loyalty and nostalgia aspect, where other franchises just kind of disappear and we don't think about them anymore? Well, I think Blockbuster has got, kind of drilled into us in that, or society into that way, that still, people feel that nostalgia.
It's hard to say. The analogy that comes up a lot is Starbucks, because there's so many of them and there used to be so many Blockbusters. But if Starbucks went away, would anybody miss it? Yeah, probably, but would there be that level of nostalgia? And I think no, but I think what it is about Blockbuster is it's the movies first of all, because we still have movies and people still love the movies they grew up with. But what really people have this connection to, this came up a lot when we were interviewing people for the movie and just talking to people in general, was like it wasn't just about the movies, it was about the experience of going there and picking out the movies and interacting with the people. And we heard countless stories of like, my parents were divorced, but every time I would go visit my dad, the first thing we do is we'd go to the video store and he'd let me pick out 2 movies for the weekend. Or, every time I would visit my grandmother, we would go pick out a movie and she would pick one out and I would pick one out. And it was never about the movies. It was always about who you were with and, what you were doing at that time. And it was such a positive thing in people's lives, very few people were going to Blockbuster Video because they were sad or, it was like, even if you were sad and lonely, it was still like a place you could go that was happy and offered some sense of community and great movies and terrible movies, but mostly great movies. And so I think that's what it is about Blockbuster that people latch onto. It's also kind of become a catch-all for other video stores. Like I did go to Blockbuster quite a bit, but I also went to local video stores and, Hollywood Video and these other places. But when you think back, it all kind of blends together of like, yeah, I went to the video store and it was great. And that was part of my life and I miss it. And I think Blockbuster was kind of the brand name version of that. So it's an easy, you can see that blue and yellow logo and you're taken back to the video store, even if your video store had a, red and pink logo and it was called Movie Hut or whatever.
Right. Because like I said, it does seem something unique to Blockbuster. I don't see anyone making the last Radio Shack. You know what I'm saying? It's not the same thing,
Well, and it was also more habitual. I know people went to Radio Shack often, and I probably went to Radio Shack once every 3 months or something. But I think most people, at least at one point in their lives, went to a video store, weekly, sometimes twice a week. And it was this really big part of our lives. And people went on dates there and they took their families there. Nobody went on a date to a Radio Shack.
Hopefully not. Or was the last one. If that was the date they went on, it was definitely the last date they had.
Exactly. So, and Radio Shack wasn't for everybody. It was for nerds like me.
Yeah.
I went there to get like a replacement volume knob for a stereo I had taken apart. You didn't go there to like see the new Sandra Bullock movie.
Yeah.
Like it didn't appeal to everybody. It appealed to a more niche audience, and like Toys R Us is gone, but now it might be coming back and whatever. But that wasn't for everybody either. It was just for kids or parents.
Eventually, when Best Buy goes under, I don't know if people will make a film about that one either. Eventually, that's going to happen.
Yeah, it's seeming kind of inevitable, and that's the problem. Is because like you don't need to try on a laptop,
right?
Like I was saying, people are always going to want to go to a store to buy a sweater because it matters what it feels like and how it fits. But Best Buy is a great example of a place where nothing they sell really do you have to touch before you buy it or interact with it. You can, and it's nice. It's nice to get a sense of like, oh, which smartphone feels better in your hand, but I don't know. You don't really need that. You can just click and have one sent to your house and then it's at your house. If you don't like it, you can send it back and get another one sent to your house. So it's retail seems to be dying. I mean, shopping malls are dying and Best Buy is dying. And the pandemic, of course, accelerated all of that dramatically. And you have places closing left and right. So, yeah, I think at some point we will be nostalgic for just stores. It's not going to be any specific one. It's just like, hey, remember when we used to go to a store
like the random walking through a mall. It's empty, but we're just gonna wander through it and be like, remember this? It's a mall. There's stores all over this place. Once upon a time, explain to your family what a mall was.
Right. Explaining to like our great grandchildren, there were malls, and inside of malls there were stores, and the kids will not know what either of those things are.
It's gonna be a weird future ahead of us.
They'll be like, Amazon used to be a place that you would go. Just like when Netflix was early and you'd say, yeah, the internet used to come in the mail.
Yeah, and people used to work at places, things like registers and stuff. Remember that?
Yeah. And that's another thing is what's going to happen to all these jobs?
Yeah.
Robots mail out everything from the shipping centers. So if everybody's checking themselves out on the internet, where will all those people work who worked at the mall?
I agree with you 100%. Now, another cool thing about your videos that a lot of celebrities came on to talk about the Blockbuster. Like I said, Jimmy Kennedy, Ron Funches, Kevin Smith.
Mm-hmm.
How did you get all these people, and how readily did you? What was like the success rate of reaching out to these people and getting these yeses? It's impressive.
Thank you. It's a lot of tenacity, a lot of cold calls. We reached out to people through agents, managers, friends of friends, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, however we could. And some of them took years to get them to say yes. And some of them were like excited about it right away. It really helped that we were making a movie about Blockbuster. People, had a connection to that. It's not like we were trying to get them to talk about something, heavy or difficult. We're like, hey, remember video renting? Do you want to talk about that? That'd be fun, right? And then for the most part, people were into it. And we did try to select people that had either worked at a video store or, were known for, like Jamie Kennedy played a video store clerk in Scream. So we thought he would be great. We didn't know that one of his first jobs was for Blockbuster, that he surprised us with that.
Right.
But, for the most part, people were pretty excited about it. We did have a handful of people who didn't want to do it, and that makes perfect sense. If you don't have anything to say about Blockbuster, don't be in a Blockbuster documentary.
Right, right. Well, one interesting character that you had, I'm trying to remember his name, the guy from Toxic Avenger.
Lloyd Kaufman.
Lloyd Kaufman. Did you know he was going to be so ornery? Part of me was wondering, he was so kind of over the top. Like, was he kidding? Was he really just that, like, ornery in person?
Oh, he really hates Blockbuster that much. That's for sure. We had a feeling, actually, when we started, we thought more people would have his point of view, because when we were starting, it was before the nostalgia really kicked in. So nobody was talking fondly about Blockbuster. And like the people I know in like the film world and just, pop culture, we like tolerated Blockbuster, right? It was like a necessary evil. We hated late fees. We hated, they kind of had this bad rep for censorship. There were no, they had like the edited version of Showgirls instead of the NC-17 version. No adult section, no indie movies really to speak of, no trauma movies. It was a utility. It was like, that's where you went to get your new Blockbuster movies. And then we would also go to like the local mom and pop store to rent, the weird movies or the cool movies, or just to not deal with the late fees or the corporate. So I kind of assumed that everyone we talked to would be like, yeah, Blockbuster was fine, but they were also kind of evil and corporate and, didn't help indie movies. And they kind of led to the situation we're in now, where there's these giant mainstream movies and then, not a lot in between. And then these indie movies. And that was like Blockbuster would decide what movies were going to be on the shelves. They would put 200 copies of the Titanic up on the wall. And so that's the movie that everybody would see. They contributed to like kind of taking away people's choice and just limiting it to like what we decide the mainstream movies are going to be. And it was kind of this monopoly thing. And I I honestly, I agree with Lloyd Kaufman about most of his ideas. I don't agree with the way he says them, but we thought at that time, his interview was one of the first ones. We thought everybody was going to have something negative to say about Blockbuster. And as it turned out, he was the only one. Most people were looking back through these kind of rose-colored nostalgia glasses that were like, you know what, I'm just going to remember the good parts, the Friday night date night and getting the popcorn and renting the movies and having a great time. So we ended up using Lloyd Kaufman in the movie as kind of this counterpoint. But when we did his interview, we thought he would be negative about it because he's, this indie film guy, and we knew Blockbuster wasn't carrying promo movies, so he probably would have something to say about that. But I didn't think he'd be the only angry person in our movie. I thought, most people would be like, yeah, Blockbuster was fine, but also kind of this evil corporation. As it turned out, most people would just remember the good parts, and that's worked out to our benefit because we want people to feel good when they watch our movie. So
I think it would have definitely changed the experience if there's more Kaufmans and less Kevin Smiths in how they handled it. The feel of the film watching it, I think, would have been very different. Mm-hmm. And obviously if it was Kaufman's perspective and then the Harding's interaction, it would have been a very odd combo with just that. But the fact that you had all these other celebrities who do also contribute to the positive feel of it, I think it creates such a better experience watching it. Like, it just felt pleasant. Instead of, like, I'm sure it was Kaufman primarily that kind of perspective, it would have had a very different viewing aspect to it.
Yeah. Well, I agree. And I think, we're just lucky that everybody was so positive, but we did also kind of steer it to be that way. And it had a lot to do with Sandy. Like, if her attitude hadn't been so positive, maybe we would have had to use more Kaufman stuff and less Kevin Smith stuff.
So that's interesting. So, like, if you had gone into the Blockbuster and it was that cranky old man you're telling about, let's say, who was in charge, you think you really would have had a significantly different movie? In the big picture would have been significantly different?
Yeah, 100%. I think.
Oh, wow.
That would have changed everything. It really did hinge around Sandy and her personality, and then all the people around her. It became this kind of story of this family that runs this video store, which to me is what I always liked about the local mom and pop video stores. Like, it's a small business and they love movies, and that's why they're doing it. And that the fact that this particular Blockbuster was not a corporate store, but was a franchise, and that they were almost bullied into becoming a franchise by the corporation.
Yeah.
That was really, when I found that out, that's when I knew we had a movie instead of, just some footage, because that it is the underdog story, right? They were this independent video store. They got bullied into becoming a Blockbuster franchise, and then somehow they managed to outlast all the other stores. That's David and Goliath. That's this underdog story of, at one point to them, Blockbuster was the villain, just like I assumed it would be to everybody else, because they did put a lot of mom and pop video stores out of business.
Yeah.
And that was not good for movies in general, and certainly not for the local video store. So if it had been a corporate store and maybe had a cranky old man manager, I don't even know that we'd have a movie at all.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of brought me back as well. Not because of Blockbuster, but back in the 80s, my father owned one of those, a video store, a mom and pop video store. He was the owner of it. It wasn't Blockbuster, because Blockbuster wasn't a thing really back then. It was another store called Major Video that moved across the street and took it. But it was interesting hearing about the transition to what he went, which was like the buying the movies at the $100 fee to buy the one movie to rent, which was kind of where he was at that beginning. And then right at the edge is when the competitor came out and did the mass purchasing of movies and was able to rent, tons of movies at like $1, $2. So it was interesting hearing that too. And fill in some of the dots on what happened there as well. So I found it, even from just a point of view of history, it was an interesting lesson of what happened in the business like that too. And obviously that was what impacted when my father had his business. But like I said, that was pre-Blockbuster. I think Blockbuster wasn't a thing back then in the late 80s. Not really.
Yeah, they were, but maybe not where you live. They started in 85. So
yeah,
they were mostly still in Texas for a little while. But the corporate stuff, and then finding out about, kind of that back alley partnership they had with the movie studios where they got their movies for free, but the mom and pop video stores were still paying $100 a copy. And that's why they, Blockbuster would guarantee in stock new releases because they're not paying for them. Why not get 300 copies of Titanic?
Right.
And that was fascinating, as somebody who was only ever a customer back then. I had no idea that that's how any of that worked, but it's all kind of, again, it leans towards the evil corporation side of it that, I don't know, we just didn't want to fixate on.
So where can our listeners find The Last Blockbuster? And more importantly, can you rent The Last Blockbuster at The Last Blockbuster?
Yeah, so that was something we talked about, I think, on the first day of production at the store. We said, wouldn't it be great if we finished this movie and got it out on DVD and they could have it at the store? And we managed to accomplish that. So you can rent The Last Blockbuster at The Last Blockbuster.
That's really cool.
You can buy it from their website. Is actually the only place you can. I think there's like a special edition DVD Blu-ray combo that it comes from the store, and somebody in a Blockbuster uniform will package it up and mail it to your house, and it might have some of that Blockbuster smell in the package.
Oh, very cool. So
you can also stream it on Netflix.
Netflix, yeah.
We're still inclined.
I think I saw it on Amazon Prime is where I saw The Last Blockbuster. And like I said, I thought it was fantastic. What are you working on now? What's your next film in line?
So I'm working on a bunch of things right now. A lot of them I can't really talk about yet, but we do have a series in the works that's about music venues that closed down during the pandemic. And I'm not directing it. I'm a producer on it with my buddy Aaron Roberts is directing it. And that's called 1 Year Dark. And it just got into the Catalyst. I guess it's a film festival, but it's for TV. That's exciting. I've got, what can I talk about? I have a bunch of projects in development and I would like for them all to happen, but probably they won't. So I can't talk about most of them.
When as they are happening, can you come back on the show and discuss them?
Sure. Yeah. When things happen.
That
talk about things.
That'd be fantastic. I would love to hear what's moving on. As I said, The Last Blockbuster, I thought it was such a well done film. How you edited, how it was assembled, how you created a true storyline with it. It was a very entertaining. I didn't think I was going to sit and watch it necessarily. I was like, I don't know how I feel about watching about Block, but then I started watching. I just got sucked into it with me. I was like, this is really fantastic. It was it's like watching a regular movie that just happens to be a real life you're following, And I think you did such a wonderful job with it.
Thank you so much. I'm really glad you enjoyed it. That's why we make movies.
I quite literally, as I was watching it, I think it was about a half hour in, I was like, I'm going to contact the Pop Motion Picture and try to interview Taylor Morden, the director of this. As I was watching, I was like, Interact TV, I was like, yeah, I need to talk to the director of this.
Nice. Right on. Well, now we have talked.
Most certainly, and I thank you so much for spending the time with me. You are very fun to talk to.
Thanks, you too.
All right, have a very good night.
You too.
Spaghetti! And we're back. That's right. We are back. Back in the saddle again. Well, I hope you guys really, really enjoyed that as much as we did making it for you. And if you like what you heard and you want to hear more, you got to go check out spoilerverse.com, because at spoilerverse.com, we have a plethora amazing directors and artists of all walks of life, and editors and writers, and oh my God, are you a lover of comic books like we are? Then there's so many amazing people from the comic book world over at spoilerverse.com, and I highly implore you to go there and check it out. Yeah, and while you're there, you can check out all the other podcasts on our network, like Bridging the Geekdoms and Funny Book Forensics and Haphazard Adventures and Nerds from the Crypt and so many more.
Misery
We put out
Point Radio.
episodes all the time. Go check all of them out. And check out all of the reviews and previews and articles we have going up every single day for you. Every day on spoilerverse.com for you to check out and to read and to love and to like and to comment. We have a store link. If you want to help support the site, you can do it two ways. One, go to our Patreon, which is patreon.com/spoilercountry, or go to our store link in the middle of the site there and get a t-shirt, a face mask, a hoodie, something, look fly as hell, and help support the site when you do that, because we get $1 or $2. And, maybe you want to talk to us. If you do, you can do it obviously on all the socials, but if you go to scpod.us/discord, you can join our public Discord server and come.
What's going on, everyone? Are you still looking for that perfect one-stop shop for all things pop culture? That one place where you can hear hot takes about superheroes, Star Wars, video games, and more? Well, fear not. Bridging the Geekdoms is the place for you. A podcast that focuses on the current rumors, scoops, and controversies within the pop culture world. Hosted exclusively on the Spoilerverse Network, you can find us on any one of your favorite podcatching apps, YouTube, and at spoilerverse.com. So don't miss out on the excitement. Find us and subscribe now.